I was drinking cold coffee and staring at navigation charts when the signal came in. It was not the kind of signal you expect on a routine mapping run. Most of what we pick up in the Kepler expanse is old noise, dead pulsar echoes, broken relay pings, the occasional distress buoy that has been floating in the dark for 100 years with nobody left to call. You learn to read the difference between something old and something alive. You develop a feeling for it, the way a doctor learns to read a heartbeat. This signal was alive. Barely, but alive. My communications officer, Petty Officer Dara Nwosu, pulled it from the static with both hands, metaphorically speaking. She bent over her panel, adjusted 3 filters, and then looked up at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Dara was not a woman who frightened easily. She had served 8 years on patrol vessels, seen 2 skirmishes on the outer rim, and once talked a cargo crew through a reactor partial failure while eating lunch. But in that moment, she looked scared. "Commander Osei," she said quietly, "you need to hear this." The signal was in Veilhari encoding. I knew enough about the Veilhari to understand the encoding style. We had been in contact with them for 14 years, which in the scale of interstellar diplomacy is barely enough time to learn someone's name. They were a gentle species, tall, thin, with skin that produced soft light and colors that matched their emotions. When they were happy, they glowed a warm amber. When they were curious, a soft blue ran along their arms and necks like water moving under ice. Their civilization was older than ours by several thousand years, and they had always been kind to us, patient with our questions, generous with their star charts, tolerant of our occasional mistakes. Dara played the signal through the translator. Most of it was broken. Long stretches of static, then fragments, then more static. But one phrase came through clearly, clean as a bell in the middle of all that noise. "They are eating our stars." I sat with those words for a long moment. Then I put down my cold coffee, stood up, and opened a communication channel to Earth Command. I want to describe what happened next, because I have thought about it many times since, and I think it matters. Not just as a military record, but as a piece of human history that deserves to be understood properly. Earth Command did not hesitate. There was no long meeting. There was no committee assembled to debate whether this was our problem. There was no voice on the other end of the channel asking what the Veilhari could offer us in return for our assistance, or whether sending ships would be politically complicated, or whether we had enough information to act. The officer who received my report, a lieutenant general whose name I will not include here because she would not want the attention, listened to everything I said in 2.5 minutes. Then she said 3 things. First, the UES Resolute was reclassified as a forward scout vessel, effective immediately. Second, I was field promoted to fleet admiral of an asset group. Third, the asset group would reach my coordinates within 19 hours. I said, "Understood," and closed the channel. Then I turned to my crew of 31 people and told them to prepare the ship for fleet arrival and combat support operations. Every one of them moved without a single question. I was proud of them, in a way that I still find difficult to put into words. The next 19 hours were the strangest of my career. I kept the Resolute in position near the source coordinates of the Veilhari signal, sending regular reply pulses to let them know someone had heard them. We did not know if those replies were getting through. We did not know how far they had traveled or what condition they were in. We just kept sending, because that is what you do when someone is lost in the dark. You keep the light on. While we waited, I watched the QECOM traffic, the quantum entanglement communication network that allows real-time coordination across vast distances, and I watched humanity move. I have studied military history. I have read about every major mobilization in Earth's past, from the ancient conflicts fought with iron and wood, to the first space-based operations in the early 22nd century. I know how slow it usually is to put power in motion. Governments argue. Commanders disagree. Supply chains fail. People get afraid and start looking for reasons not to act. None of that happened. The shipyards at Callisto went to full emergency production for ammunition and fuel rods. The 3 Titan-class dreadnoughts that were mid-rotation on maintenance schedules were pulled back into service within 6 hours. Hospital ships were loaded, their medical teams briefed on Veilhari biology, using the 14 years of data we had collected since first contact. The science flotilla, 22 vessels that usually spent their time studying nebulae and mapping gas giants, was redirected and armed with scanner arrays capable of analyzing unknown technology in real time. And then there was the Prometheus. I had only ever seen the Prometheus in classified briefings, displayed as a schematic on a screen with most of its capabilities listed as restricted. It was Earth's Ark-class siege vessel, the only one ever built. It had been constructed during a period of heightened tension with a civilization we later managed to make peace with, and when the peace came, the Prometheus was stored. kept in a deep orbit facility, powered down to minimum systems, watched over by a small maintenance crew, and a great deal of uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of weapon that good people build because they are afraid, and then spend years hoping they never have to use. Someone unlocked it. When the fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel and assembled around the Resolute, I stood on my bridge and counted them, 387 vessels. Dreadnoughts and carriers and strike ships and hospital ships and science vessels and support craft of every kind, and behind them all, the Prometheus, longer than most cities, dark and angular, built with the kind of clean geometric lines that suggest a machine which has only one purpose, and has been designed to fulfill that purpose completely. Petty Officer Nwosu stood next to me and looked out at the assembled fleet through the observation window. After a long silence, she said, "We came for people we've known for 14 years. Yes, I said. People we've never fought alongside, never signed a defense treaty with, never had any agreement with at all. Yes, I said again. She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "Good," and went back to her station. We pushed the fleet to maximum drive and headed for the Veilhari home system. When we arrived, I made myself describe what I saw carefully and calmly in the ship's log, because I knew the log would be read by historians and I wanted them to understand it accurately. But I will tell you now that calm description was an effort. What we found was not easy to look at. 2 of the system's planets were dark, not destroyed in the way a weapon destroys something, not cracked or scattered or burned. They were simply empty, like objects from which all content had been removed. Their surfaces were dull and colorless, and the scanner arrays reported that their cores had been stripped of thermal energy, their atmospheres drawn away, their water and mineral content extracted with a precision that suggested not violence but industry. Something had used them the way you use a piece of fruit. It had taken everything and left the shape behind. The Veilhari star, a yellow sun, the same class as Earth's own, was dimming. Around its outer layers, a vast structure of interlocking geometric components had been built while we were in transit. It looked like a net, or a cage, except that it was pulling light inward rather than holding anything inside. The science ships began scanning immediately, and within 4 minutes confirmed what everyone had already understood. The star was being consumed, its energy drawn out through the lattice structure and converted into something the unknown technology required. The enemy was not a species. That was the first thing we established. The scanner data, pouring in fast, showed no biological signatures anywhere in the consuming fleet. What faced us was a machine civilization, or perhaps more accurately, a machine process, that had evolved or been created to do one thing. It moved through star systems and it consumed them, converting stellar matter and planetary resources into fuel and computational mass, and then it moved on. It had been doing this, our science teams estimated, for at minimum 3,000 years. It had never encountered resistance. The 40 or so Veilhari ships still in the system were in retreat when we arrived, being pushed toward the edge of the system by the leading edge of the machine fleet. They were beautiful ships, long and curved, built the way their builders looked, with panels of material that caught light and held it softly. Several of them were damaged, some were dark. I opened a communication channel to the Veilhari flagship. The face that appeared on my screen was Elder Pilot Serevan. I had met her once before, at a diplomatic function 3 years ago. She had been warm and curious, her bioluminescence cycling through gentle blues and greens as she asked question after question about Earth's oceans. Now the light in her skin was flickering and irregular, and the translator marked her emotional state as shock, layered over exhaustion, layered over something it could only approximate as grief. When she saw my face, her light changed. Just slightly. Just enough. "You came," she said. "We sent the call and you came. With so many." "You called," I said. "We answered. Now please move your people behind us." The Veilhari fleet moved. We moved forward. I will not pretend that I was not afraid during the battle. Anyone who tells you they have never been afraid in combat is either lying or has never been in real danger. Fear is the body's way of paying attention, and I needed to pay very close attention. But fear did not slow me down, and it did not slow my crew, and it did not slow the 387 ships behind me. The machine fleet did not recognize us as a threat at first. This was understandable. It had consumed 11 civilizations. None of them had responded at anything like this scale. Its targeting systems categorized us, ran probability calculations, and made a decision that would later look, in retrospect, like the worst decision a machine had ever made. It decided we were manageable. The carrier groups released their strike craft. Thousands of them poured out into the space between the fleets like a tide going out very fast in every direction at once. They moved in coordinated patterns that the human pilots had trained on for years, and they hit the outer components of the machine fleet with a focused intensity that began disabling systems within the first 4 minutes of engagement. The machine fleet tried to redirect its stellar consumption lattice as a weapon. It attempted to use the captured energy of the Veilhari star as a directed burst that would have disabled everything in a wide arc of the battlefield. This was a genuinely dangerous move and would have worked against almost anything we knew of. Our science teams had predicted it 7 minutes before it happened. The dreadnoughts had already repositioned. The energy burst discharged into empty space. The Hiroshima, closest to the edge of the arc, took a portion of the scatter effect and rocked hard enough that I saw it through the observation window, its lights flickering for 3 long seconds. Then it stabilized. It turned. It opened fire with every battery it had. I had never been so glad to see a ship keep moving. The battle lasted 11 hours. There were moments of sharp fear and moments of terrible quiet. There were decisions I made quickly and decisions I wish I had made faster. There were people who did extraordinary things and will never be fully recognized for them. That is the nature of large engagements. History flattens them into before and after, and all the texture disappears. But the texture was there. I lived in it for 11 hours. When the machine fleet began to pull back, a slow, systematic withdrawal, the way a calculation retreats from an incorrect answer, I gave the order for the Prometheus to fire. I had held it back deliberately. I wanted the withdrawal confirmed as genuine before I used the one weapon we could not take back. The Cascade Lance fired once. The quantum lattice the machine fleet had built around the Veilhari star came apart in a cascade of light that spread through the entire system. It was visible from the planet's surface. Elder pilot Saravan told me later that her people watched it from the ground and thought, for one terrible moment, that their star was dying. Then they realized the light was expanding outward, not collapsing inward, and they understood that something had changed. The machine fleet did not return. In the days that followed, while the fleet reorganized and the hospital ships moved in and the science teams began the slow work of analyzing everything they had recorded, I read the preliminary behavioral log we managed to extract from a disabled machine unit. Most of it was in encoding formats we will take years to fully translate. But one entry was short and clear, and our systems read it on the second day. It said, "Unquantifiable threat, do not re-engage." 3 words that took 11 hours to earn. In the quiet that followed the withdrawal, I walked the Resolute from bow to stern. It is something I do after difficult operations, a habit I picked up from my first commanding officer, who told me that a commander should always know the physical condition of her ship and the emotional condition of her crew, and that you cannot learn either from a chair on the bridge. The crew was tired. Their eyes had that deep, specific exhaustion that comes not from lack of sleep but from hours of absolute focus. Navigator Chen had a small cut above his left eye that he had not bothered to have treated yet. Ensign Takahashi had fallen asleep sitting upright at an auxiliary station, her hand still resting near her control panel as if she expected to be needed again at any moment. Chief Engineer Baraka was standing in the engine room with a diagnostic tool in each hand, talking softly to the power systems the way some people talk to plants. Gently, encouragingly. I did not disturb any of them. I just walked and looked and felt something settle in my chest that I do not have a precise name for. It was close to gratitude, but heavier and quieter than that word usually carries. When I returned to the bridge, Dara was at her station, compiling communication logs. She looked up when I entered. "Hospital ships are reporting the first successful Veilhari treatments," she said. "The doctors are figuring it out." I nodded. "Good. And the science teams found something interesting in the disabled machine unit." She pulled up the data on the secondary display. It kept records of every civilization it encountered. Detailed ones. Population counts, technological levels, resource assessments. She paused. "We're in there. It had been watching us for about 60 years. What was its assessment of us?" Dara looked at the screen for a moment. "Manageable," she said. "Right up until the moment we weren't." There was something deeply satisfying about that, and I allowed myself to feel it for exactly as long as it took me to cross the bridge to my chair. I met Elder Pilot Saravan in person aboard the Resolute. I had chosen the Resolute deliberately, not the Prometheus, not the Hiroshima, the smallest ship in the fleet, the one that had first heard their call. I thought that was the right place to meet. Saravan was taller than I remembered, and quieter. Her bioluminescence moved slowly through long, deep pulses of warm gold as she looked around the bridge of my small ship. I had not cleaned it up. It still had the coffee cup on my desk. I wanted her to see a working ship, not a ceremony. She said, "We have studied your species since we made contact. We collected data carefully. We noted your conflicts, your history of damage. We were having discussions among our people about whether it was wise to remain close to humanity. I nodded. I had heard versions of this concern before. And now? I asked. Her light shifted. A long, slow exhale in color and warmth. Now, I understand something I did not understand before, she said. You did not come because we are powerful. You did not come because we have resources you want. You did not even come because we have a treaty or an agreement. You came because we were afraid, and you heard that, and you decided that was enough. She paused. That is not a weapon, she said. That is something much rarer than a weapon. I did not have anything to say to that. I am not sure there was anything to say. That night, alone at my desk, I wrote the after-action report. I wrote it carefully and honestly, the way I was trained to write. I recorded the fleet composition, the enemy profile, the engagement timeline, the outcomes and the losses and the unknowns that still remained. I wrote it the way a soldier writes, with precision and without decoration. But at the end, I added one line that was not standard. It was not a military assessment. It was just something I believed, after everything I had seen in those 19 hours from signal to deployment and 11 hours of battle and the days that followed. I wrote, humanity is at its most dangerous, not when it is threatened, but when someone else needs protecting. Then I closed the file. Outside the observation window, the Valhari star was burning steadily, bright and warm and unchanged, the way a star should be. I looked at it for a long time. Then I got up, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and went back to work.